A couple of months back we took a look at some out of bounds and behind the scenes secrets of the Resident Evil 4 remake. Now I know this is probably a little late, but in this video we'll be taking a look at the Separate Ways DLC, including out of bounds secrets, developer tricks, some viewer requests, including of course one of the most requested scenes I think I've ever received, and how it works off camera. It is of course the notorious laser corridor scene, and believe me, you might not expect what you're about to see. Alright, let's get into this one. Separate Ways begins with a cutscene of Luis being held captive in a holding cell that can be found at the back of the castle. What I found quite interesting during this scene is the way that the models move and also the lighting changes. Now, it is quite dark during this scene other than what can be seen on camera at the time, so I have added some additional lighting to make it easier to see what's happening off camera. Also, look out for Ada's trick shot with the cigarette packet.
That's no way to finish a dance. Your favorite, I believe?
Excellent timing, Ada. You know how I feel about being tied up. And yes, many thanks.
Fetch the ember. We'll meet up later.
No! Sorry, what kind of a man leaves a lady... Then we meet at the church. Let's not make it a funeral, eh?
So he wants me to retrieve the amber.
The opening of Chapter 2 shows Ada zipping about and kicking ass at the Quarry. This part of the cutscene takes place in a section of the Quarry that we don't enter in Separate Ways, though we do with Leon during the main campaign. One of the questions I wanted to answer during this opening is where exactly is the amber capsule that we see in the close-up shots? Well, it's hidden way below the Quarry map in its own little sky dome. Also, when dropping off the wooden platform, when and how do the group of enemies that break through the gate appear? As you can see, the brute Minotaur zips across to behind the gate whilst being replaced by extra villagers. Then they all run around the outside into position. Also, a nice touch is that even though the player wouldn't necessarily see it, the brute is animated to bang on the back of the gate. And I just want to say a thanks to SVAFnemesis, who I believe is an animator at Ubisoft, who got in touch on my video covering how the RE4 bosses work off camera, and explained that this is probably due to the different teams working on the game at different paces and times, so won't necessarily know what animations will be needed, hence why they may create some that are never seen. It's always great to get these kind of insights into gaming development, so thanks again.
Leon, why am I not surprised?
After Ada hookshots onto the top of the windmill, we get a quick shot of Leon fending off some villagers. It's interesting to see how small of an area this takes place in, and even sections of the map and the terrain are cut away to save on resources, though there is a fire hidden just out of bounds of camera shot that we don't normally see. A nice sound detail that can be heard is whilst heading towards the church. If you turn around, that is, and head back to the village at this point, you can hear gunshots. This is obviously to allude to the fact that this is the same point in time that Leon is fighting the villagers on the other side of the wall. Just in case you did notice this and were wondering, no, Leon isn't over here. It is just the sound effects. This is also the case in the later chapter. When we turn around, we can hear Leon fighting Salazar through the door.
Stood up again.
The scene when Leon is fighting the villagers and Ada rings the church bell gave me a good chance to show an example of how the maps and the terrain load depending on what is being shown on camera. But first, a nice little detail that you may have missed, and it was sent to me as a viewer request. It's to take a look at who we believe is Luis being carried away in a bag. Unfortunately, as cool as it would be, Luis's model isn't in the bag, as you may have guessed. But I thought I'd show it anyway just in case anyone else was wondering. Now, back to the map. In the bottom left, we can see the normal camera shots compared with an overlook of the whole space.
Don't worry, Leon. First time's free. Don't keep me waiting, Luis.
Another request I was asked about was to compare some of the scenes that appear in Leon's campaign to Ada's, and whether each of the characters can be seen off camera. Now this took some doing because I had to go back and forth between the two campaigns, but from the instances that I took a look at, and it was much the same for all of them, when we look at Leon's campaign, the only times you can see Ada is when she's in shot of the camera. For instance, at Mendez's house, after going up onto the rooftop, she simply disappears off camera, whereas in Separate Ways, Leon disappears off the camera from within the house. So it's kind of the opposite in each campaign. I hope I've made sense with that explanation.
Sorry, big guy. Can't let you go that way.
When saving Luis from the burning room, we don't really get to see much of the room itself, or what was on the desk at the time. It turns out, whoever was sat here not only likes booze and cigarettes, but a bit of Shakespeare too. I doubt this has any further meaning other than being used as an asset for the pages, but it's a pretty cool detail nonetheless. Something interesting I noticed when finding out where Jack Krauser takes off to in his speedboat is that when he comes to a stop off camera, for some reason he seems to be staring at the moon. Maybe it has some kind of hold over it.
Looking for something?
One of the encounters that I couldn't miss out of the video is the one that we have with the monstrous Martinico, because it's a pretty memorable scene, but to be honest, there isn't that much that you probably wouldn't expect, especially if you've watched some of my previous videos. Once out of shot, like here as I move Ada in the tunnel underneath the floor, Martinico disappears and then reappears just out of shot at various times once we hit certain trigger points. Alright, so it's now time for possibly the most requested scene I think I've ever received for a video. It is the laser corridor scene. Now at first I was a little worried about what might be involved in this one and whether the video would end up getting slammed with an age restriction. However, it turns out it's not that gruesome of a sight. In fact, it's pretty interesting to see. Bizarre, but pretty interesting. What's happening here is rather than totally disconnecting Ada's head from her neck, the skeletal mesh is still attached, which is why we can see her neck stretching way longer than it should be. Her head is held just out of camera shot and then drops to the ground when needed, without the player ever knowing what's really going on. Until now, that is. Here it is again in slow motion.
Become one with us.
Coming towards the end, we're just going to take a quick look at the final boss fight with Saddler. Now, I covered a lot of this during the Resident Evil 4 Remake video, but one thing I noticed that I missed in that video is this default pose that Saddler goes into as he changes form. It all happens within a couple of frames off camera, but this has to be one of the biggest default poses I think I've ever seen. It's cool to think that what we're seeing here is probably how the developers worked on the model during certain phases of its design process. Also, of course, during the scene in Leon's campaign, Ada simply disappears for most of it. However, during separate ways, Leon is fighting Saddler throughout the whole sequence. They continuously loop until we pick up the rocket launcher, which then loads the cutscene to where we can find Saddler changes into his final form. Even after this, Leon is constantly fighting Saddler off camera, until whenever it is that we throw him the rocket launcher. Last but not least, something I did a short video on not too long ago was showing where Wesker is after the final credits roll. However, at the end of Separate Ways, he does teleport to a new location, which is on board a huge ship. So in this one, just for reference, I wanted to show how far away the ship is from Wesker's underground man cave.